Only one bedroom left. Muscular, sterile millionaire and gorgeous woman share an unforgettable hotel stay. She closed her eyes, shoulders sagging. 28 years old, fighting for a promotion that could change her mother's life, and now stranded with a stranger who looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. Would you trust a gorgeous stranger in your hotel room for one night? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She was supposed to be alone in that hotel suite, but when lightning struck at midnight, she discovered the stranger in her bed was hiding a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love. The baby bracelet in his trembling hands belonged to the child he'd never have. What started as a hotel mix-up was about to become the night that proved broken hearts could still beat in perfect rhythm. Have you ever trusted a stranger with your deepest pain? Have you ever felt like your body betrayed your dreams of family? Tonight, two wounded souls will discover that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "I can't give you what you want." But will vulnerability be enough to bridge the gap between their broken pieces? Drop a heart if you've ever fallen for someone at the worst possible time. Let me take you back to where it all began, a storm-soaked night in Austin that changed everything. She kicked off her broken heels and pushed open the hotel room door, expecting privacy. Instead, she found 6 feet of muscle and trouble toweling off like he owned the place. Tiffany Rogers stood dripping in the doorway, her business dress clinging to every curve, mascara smudged from the Texas downpour that had turned downtown Austin into a war zone. The conference had been a disaster. 3 hours of presentations ruined by a fire alarm, potential clients scattered to the wind, and now this. Excuse me? Her voice cut through the luxury suite like a blade. You're in my room. The man at the minibar turned slowly, water droplets trailing down abs that belonged in a fitness magazine. Carson Blake, though she didn't know his name yet, had the kind of face that made smart women do stupid things. Sharp jaw, storm gray eyes, and a smile that screamed danger wrapped in expensive cologne. Your room. He raised one eyebrow, completely unbothered by her fury. Check your key card, sweetheart. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite as Texas lightning turned the Austin skyline into a photographer's dream. All sharp angles and electric beauty. The space between them crackled with tension thick enough to cut. Don't sweetheart me. Tiffany marched past him, heels clicking against marble floors that probably cost more than her car. She yanked out her phone. Water damage be damned. Hotel management is about to hear from me. Carson watched her pace, the towel riding dangerously low on his hips. Something about her fire intrigued him. Most women melted when they saw his chest. This one looked ready to punch him in it. Look, before you declare war, he said, pulling on a black t-shirt that did nothing to hide his build. Maybe we should figure this out together. I've been here 2 hours. My luggage is unpacked. My conference materials are spread across that table. Well, my conference materials are soaked, my presentation bombed, and I've had exactly 0 good things happen today. She spun around, brown eyes blazing. So forgive me if I'm not feeling charitable towards some random guy who... A knock interrupted her rant. The hotel manager practically cowered in the doorway, tablet clutched to his chest like armor. Miss Rogers, Mr. Blake, I am so terribly sorry. The storm knocked out our booking system right as the tech convention filled every hotel in the city. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. This is literally the last available suite in Austin tonight. I can offer you both full refunds, but nowhere else to go. Carson finished, studying Tiffany's face as the reality hit her. She closed her eyes, shoulders sagging. 28 years old, fighting for a promotion that could change her mother's life, and now stranded with a stranger who looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. Fine, she said finally. We're adults. We can share space for one night. Carson's smile was slow and dangerous. Just don't snore. I don't snore, she shot back, but her cheeks flushed. Would you trust a gorgeous stranger in your hotel room for one night? Comment yes or no below. As they drew an invisible line down the middle of the suite, neither realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing between them. She built a fortress of pillows between them, but some walls are meant to be crossed. Okay, ground rules. Tiffany stood at the foot of the king-sized bed, still damp from her shower, wearing an oversized conference t-shirt that hit mid-thigh. You stay on your side, I stay on mine. No wandering hands, no midnight conversations, no. Breathing too loudly, Carson interrupted from the couch, where he'd insisted on sleeping. He'd changed into gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, and she was trying very hard not to notice the V-shaped muscles disappearing beneath the waistband. I'm serious. She grabbed every spare pillow and arranged them down the center of the bed like a fabric wall. This is temporary, professional, platonic. Got it. Completely professional. His eyes danced with amusement. Should I avert my gaze while you climb over your pillow fortress? He crept up her neck. The man was infuriating and, unfortunately, magnetic. She'd built walls around her heart for good reasons. And Carson Blake looked like the type who specialized in demolition. Her phone buzzed. FaceTime from her best friend Maya. Girl, you better still be alive. Maya's voice filled the room before Tiffany could grab headphones. I've been worried sick since your last text about pray for me and ending up on the news. I'm fine, Tiffany whispered, glancing at Carson, who was pretending not to listen while scrolling through his phone. Just sharing space with a stranger. Sharing space with a fine stranger from the sound of your voice. Let me see him. Maya, no. But her friend had already caught a glimpse of Carson on the couch, and her squeal could probably be heard in Dallas. Lord have mercy, Tiff. That man is a whole meal and 3 desserts. You better. Tiffany ended the call, face burning. Carson was grinning openly now. 3 desserts, huh? He stood up, stretching arms that made his shirt ride up, revealing a strip of toned stomach. Your friend has good taste. Ignore her. She thinks every man over 6 feet is marriage material. What about you? The question was casual, but his eyes weren't. What do you think? The city lights painted golden rectangles across the marble floor as they moved around each other, like dancers learning a complicated routine. Every accidental brush of shoulders, every shared glance felt charged with possibility. I think, she said carefully, that I don't know you well enough to have an opinion. Fair enough. He moved toward the bathroom, pausing at the doorway. But for what it's worth, your friend was wrong about one thing. What's that? I'm not marriage material. I'm the guy women leave when they realize what I can't give them. Before she could respond, he disappeared into the bathroom, leaving her staring at the closed door with a dozen questions burning in her throat. What's your biggest hotel horror story? Share in the comments. We've all been there. At 2:47 a.m., she heard something that made her forget every rule they'd established. The sound of a grown man crying. She found him on the balcony, clutching a baby bracelet like it was the last piece of his heart. The sliding door whispered open as Tiffany stepped onto the balcony, rain-cooled air raising goosebumps on her bare arms. Carson sat hunched on the outdoor couch, shoulders shaking, his face buried in hands that held something small and silver. Carson, her voice was soft, uncertain. The confident man from earlier had vanished, leaving someone raw and broken in the Texas darkness. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed and vulnerable. I thought you were asleep. Lightning split the sky in jagged silver lines while they sat on opposite ends of the outdoor couch, close enough to touch but still protecting their hearts. The storm had gentled to a steady patter, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. Is that? She nodded toward his hands. He opened his palm, revealing a tiny bracelet with baby Blake engraved in delicate script. My ex-fiancé bought this 2 years ago. We were planning, we thought we'd have. His voice cracked. Turns out some men aren't built to be fathers. Tiffany's chest tightened. She'd heard pain before, lived it, breathed it, but something about his quiet devastation cut straight through her defenses. What happened? Sports injury when I was 22. Doctors said the damage was comprehensive. No chance of kids ever. He turned the bracelet over in his palm. Sarah stayed for 2 years after the diagnosis. Said it didn't matter, that we'd find other ways. Then one day, she just couldn't anymore. Said she wanted a real family, not a broken man playing house. The words hung between them like shattered glass. She was wrong, Tiffany said quietly. Carson's laugh was bitter. Was she? I built a company worth millions, have more money than I could spend in a lifetime, but I can't give a woman the one thing that actually matters. And you think that's all you're worth? Your ability to father children, isn't it? He looked at her with such raw honesty it made her chest ache. Every woman wants kids eventually. It's biology, nature. I'm just defective. Tiffany moved closer, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with rain. My ex-boyfriend used to say I was too ambitious for my own good. Said no man would ever love a woman who put her career first, who might not want kids right away. She met his eyes. People say cruel things when they're running from their own fears. But what if she was right? What if I'm just not enough? The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in her chest. This man who looked like he could conquer worlds believed he was fundamentally unlovable. Carson, she reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. The contact sent electricity up her arm. You saved my mother's medical bills without knowing my last name. You gave up the bed without being asked. You ordered room service with extra dessert because you noticed I didn't eat dinner. Her thumb traced across his knuckles. If that's not enough, then the world's standards are broken, not you. Have you ever shared your deepest secret with a stranger? Sometimes they're the safest people to trust. When she moved her suitcase to his side of the room, he asked the question that would change everything. Do you believe in destiny? Her answer would rewrite both their stories. She woke up in his arms, wondering if kindness could be more dangerous than desire. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning their tangled limbs into art. Two people who'd found safety in the most unexpected place. Tiffany's head rested on Carson's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, their legs intertwined like they'd been sleeping together for years instead of hours. She'd never been a cuddler. After her ex, she'd trained herself to sleep alone, to need nothing from anyone. But Carson's heartbeat against her ear felt like home in a way that terrified her. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. His fingers traced gentle patterns on her shoulder, and she realized her t-shirt had ridden up during the night, leaving her skin exposed to his touch. Morning, she should move, should create distance. Instead, she found herself pressing closer, breathing in the scent of his skin. Sleep okay? There was tenderness in his voice that made her heart skip. Better than I have in months. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. His arm tightened around her. Same. They lay in comfortable silence, watching Austin wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looked different in daylight, softer, more forgiving. Like maybe impossible things could happen here. I have to get ready for the conference, she said finally, but made no move to leave his warmth. I know. His thumb brushed across her collarbone. What time? 9. You, 10. Keynote speech. He paused. Maybe we could grab coffee after, if you want. The hope in his voice undid her. I'd like that. She finally pulled away, immediately missing his warmth. Carson watched her gather clothes for a shower, gray eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her skin flush. Tiffany, she turned at the bathroom door. Last night, thank you for listening, for staying. Thank you for letting me. The shower was torture. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his hands on her skin, remembered the broken way he'd said her name. This was dangerous territory. She had goals, plans, a life that didn't include falling for broken billionaires in Texas hotel rooms. When she emerged, he was making coffee at the Sweets bar, hair damp from his own shower, wearing a navy suit that made her mouth go dry. Breakfast, he held up a plate of fruit and pastries from room service. They ate in companionable quiet, sharing orange slices and stolen glances. When he reached over to button her blazer, such a simple, intimate gesture, her breath caught. You'll be amazing today, he said, fingers lingering at her collar. So will you. At the door, they hesitated. A handshake felt ridiculous after sleeping in each other's arms. A kiss felt like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Carson solved the dilemma by pulling her into a hug that lasted 3 heartbeats too long. When did you know someone was going to matter? Was it instant, Or did it creep up on you? She was halfway to the conference when her phone buzzed. I can't stop thinking about last night. Can we not let this end? But responding would mean risking everything she built. She tried to focus on quarterly projections, but all she could think about was the way he'd whispered her name in his sleep. The Austin Convention Center buzzed with the energy of 1,000 ambitious professionals, but Tiffany might as well have been underwater. Every presentation slide blurred into background noise as her mind replayed the morning. Carson's sleepy smile, the way his fingers had lingered on her blazer buttons, the promise in his voice when he said they didn't have to let this end. Miss Rogers? Her potential client's voice cut through her distraction. Your thoughts on the Q4 marketing strategy? Heat flooded her cheeks. She'd been caught daydreaming like a teenager. Of course, the strategy focuses on multi-platform integration with emphasis on authentic storytelling. She delivered her pitch on autopilot, muscle memory, saving her from complete professional disaster. But her phone burned against her thigh, Carson's text message waiting for a response that could change everything. "Excuse me for just one moment," she told her clients, stepping into the corridor. The hallway was quieter, filled with the kind of networking conversations that built careers. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over his message. Responding meant acknowledging that last night had affected her too. But the careful walls she'd built around her heart had cracks. Tiffany Rogers? She looked up to find a woman in an expensive suit approaching, conference badge identifying her as Sarah Mitchell, senior partner at Blake Industries. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Not yet, but I think we have a mutual friend." Carson Blake mentioned he'd met an impressive marketing consultant from Atlanta. Sarah's smile was sharp, calculating. "Small world, isn't it?" Tiffany's stomach dropped. "You work with Carson?" "Work with him, dated him, almost married him." Sarah's laugh was light, dangerous. "I'm sure he mentioned me. We have such a complicated history." Before Tiffany could respond, the conference hall doors opened and the crowd began filtering out for lunch break. And there, moving through the sea of suits like he owned the building, was Carson. The conference hall buzzed with ambition and networking energy, but when he walked through those doors in a perfectly tailored suit, everything else faded to background noise. He was scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone, looking for her. Their eyes met across the room, and his face lit up with a smile that made her forget how to breathe. He started toward her, weaving between clusters of conversations. "Well," Sarah said, following Tiffany's gaze, "this should be interesting." "Tiffany." Carson's voice was warm, intimate, completely ignoring Sarah's presence. "How did your presentation go?" "Fine. Good. Great, actually." She was babbling, hyper-aware of Sarah watching every interaction like a hawk studying prey. "Carson." Sarah stepped forward, voice honey-sweet. "Surprised seeing you here." The change in his expression was immediate. Joy replaced by wariness, warmth cooling to polite distance. "Sarah, I didn't realize Blake Industries was attending this conference." Last-minute decision. "We have so much to discuss. Should you mix business with pleasure? Have you ever taken that risk?" When her boss introduced her to the surprise keynote speaker, her heart stopped. Carson Blake was about to become either her biggest opportunity or her greatest downfall. He gave the speech of his life to a room full of strangers, but his eyes never left the one person who mattered. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our surprise keynote speaker, Carson Blake, CEO of Blake Fitness Technologies. Tiffany's world tilted as Carson walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heart hammering against her ribs. The man who'd held her while she slept, who'd whispered his deepest fears in the darkness, was about to address a room full of her potential clients. "Good afternoon." His voice carried easily through the convention hall, confident and commanding. 2 days ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. Then I met someone who showed me the difference between building a business and building a life worth living. His eyes found hers in the crowd, and the intensity of his gaze made her skin flush. Every word felt like it was meant for her alone. We talk about disruption in technology, but what about disrupting our own assumptions? What happens when we stop measuring worth by what we can produce and start measuring it by what we can inspire? Sarah appeared at Tiffany's elbow, voice low and sharp. "He's good, isn't he? Always knows exactly what his audience wants to hear." "This isn't an act," Tiffany whispered back, not taking her eyes off Carson. "Honey, with Carson, it's always an act. The question is whether you're part of the performance or the audience." But Tiffany wasn't listening. Carson's speech was raw, honest, talking about failure and resilience in ways that made the room lean forward. This wasn't corporate speak. This was a man laying his heart bare for 1,000 strangers because one woman had shown him he was worth more than his broken dreams. "The most successful ventures aren't built on perfection," he continued. "They're built on the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when we need help, to trust someone else with our deepest fears." The standing ovation was immediate and sustained. Carson's smile was humble, grateful, but when he looked at Tiffany, it was something else entirely. It was promise. 3 hours later, she sat across from him at a rooftop restaurant, the Austin skyline glittering like scattered jewels below them. String lights created intimacy while the world sparkled around them. But tension crackled between them like electricity before a storm. "Your speech was incredible," she said, twirling pasta around her fork to avoid looking directly at him. "Very personal." It was honest. He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. The simple contact sent heat shooting up her arm. "You inspired it." "Carson." She started to pull away, but he caught her hand. "I know this is complicated. I know we just met. But last night changed something in me." His thumb traced across her knuckles, the same gentle touch from the morning that had made her want things she couldn't afford to want. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." Under the table, his foot brushed against her ankle, and she had to bite her lip to keep from gasping. The man was dangerous, not because he was pushy, but because he made her want to throw away every careful plan she'd ever made. "Sarah seems to think you're quite the actor." His jaw tightened. "Sarah thinks a lot of things. Most of them wrong. What's more attractive, success or authenticity? Tell me which one wins your heart." As he walked her to her rental car, she made a decision that surprised them both. "I'm not ready for this to end." "Are you?" His smile told her everything, but her phone ringing with her mother's ringtone reminded her why she couldn't afford to fall. Her mother's voice on the phone was weak, scared, and asking the question that could end everything. "Baby, when are you coming home?" "Mama." "What's wrong?" Tiffany pressed the phone closer to her ear, Carson's hand steady on her back as they stood beside her rental car. The restaurant's warmth felt a million miles away now. "Had another episode today. Fell in the kitchen. Mrs. Johnson from next door found me." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Doctor wants to run more tests, but the insurance." Tiffany closed her eyes, the familiar weight of responsibility crushing down on her chest. "I'll be home tomorrow. Don't worry about the money." "Tiff, you can't keep." "I said don't worry." Her voice was sharper than she intended. "I'll handle it." She ended the call and stood frozen, staring at the phone like it might ring again with worse news. Carson's hand moved to her shoulder, gentle but grounding. "What can I do?" The simple question broke something open in her chest. No demands for explanation, no empty platitudes about everything being fine. Just quiet support and a willingness to help. "Nothing. This isn't your problem. It is if it's yours." She looked up at him, seeing concern instead of pity in his gray eyes. "You don't understand. My mother has been sick for 3 years. The treatments, the medications, the doctor visits, it never ends. I've been working 3 jobs just to keep up with the medical bills. Let me help." "With what?" "Money." Her laugh was bitter. "I've heard that before. Men who want to play hero until they realize how expensive broken things are to fix." Carson's jaw tightened. "I'm not your ex, Tiffany." "No, you're not. You're a billionaire who thinks money fixes everything." "Money doesn't fix everything," he said quietly, "but it can buy your mother the best doctors, the best treatments, time with you instead of you working yourself to death." The offer hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. She'd been independent for so long, fought so hard to never owe anyone anything. But watching her mother fade while she scrambled for every dollar was killing her slowly. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do that?" "Because you matter to me." He stepped closer, hands framing her face. Because last night you saw me as more than my bank account or my broken parts. Because when you look at me, I remember what it feels like to be enough. The hospital room felt sterile and cold compared to the warmth they'd built between them. But he held her hand through every doctor consultation like he'd been there forever. The protective way he positioned himself between her and the physician's clipboard full of devastating numbers, the gentle pressure of his thumb across her knuckles, it all felt natural, right like he belonged in her chaos. The experimental treatment could help, Dr. Martinez explained, but the cost. Before Carson could speak, Tiffany squeezed his hand. A warning, a boundary, a plea. How far would you go to help someone you're falling for? What would you accept from them? When he handed her the check to cover her mother's treatment, she did something that shocked him more than any rejection could. She tore it up and kissed him instead. If you're going to save me, she whispered, save me the right way. She invited him home, not as her savior, but as the man who saw her strength when everyone else saw her struggle. This is it. Tiffany stood on the front porch of the small house where she'd grown up, keys shaking in her hands. It's not much, but it's perfect, Carson said, and the sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Her childhood neighborhood told stories through every corner, struggle and survival painted in chain-link fences and hope growing through sidewalk cracks. But he walked through it seeing only the strength it had built in her, the way she'd bloomed despite rocky soil. Tiffany? That you, baby? Her mother's voice drifted from inside, weak but warm. Yeah, Mama. And I brought someone. Virginia Rogers was a smaller, frilier version of her daughter, but her eyes held the same fire. She studied Carson from her spot on the living room couch, wrapped in blankets despite the Georgia heat. So you're the young man who's been making my daughter smile. Mama, Tiffany warned, heat flooding her cheeks. What? I can hear in your voice when you call. Different kind of happy. Virginia's gaze never left Carson's face. Question is, what are your intentions with my girl? Carson sat on a coffee table directly in front of her, meeting her stare without flinching. To deserve her if she'll let me. The simple honesty in his words made Tiffany's breath catch. No flowery promises, no grand declarations. Just truth, offered without armor. Good answer. Virginia smiled. Now, tell me about this business of yours while Tiffany makes us some sweet tea. 3 hours later, Tiffany found Carson on her childhood bed, looking at the photos covering her dresser mirror, honor roll certificates, prom pictures, college graduation. The space felt different with him in it, smaller, yet somehow expanded, like her world was both shrinking to just the two of them and growing beyond boundaries she'd accepted. Valedictorian? Huh. He held up her high school graduation photo. Scholarship kid. Had to be. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. This room holds a lot of dreams. What did you dream about in this bed? The question was innocent, but his voice had dropped, gone rough around the edges. When she looked at him, his eyes had darkened with something that made her skin flush. Getting out, making something of myself, taking care of Mama. She paused, suddenly breathless. I never dreamed about this. Wanting someone so much it scared me. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her bottom lip. I'm not glass, she said between kisses, backing him against the headboard. Stop handling me like I'll break. His eyes darkened as he pulled her onto his lap, finally matching her hunger with his own. Show me what you want, he growled, and for once, she didn't hesitate. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt while his mouth traced fire down her throat. Years of careful control dissolved as she took what she needed, claimed what she wanted. Tiffany, he breathed against her skin, reverent and desperate. I'm right here, she whispered back and meant it completely. What's more intimate, letting someone see your vulnerability or showing them your strength? Comment below with your thoughts. Afterward, as they lay tangled on her couch, his phone lit up with messages, crisis at his company that couldn't wait. Go, she said, understanding. But as the door closed behind him, doubt whispered, when worlds collide, something always breaks. She just didn't know yet which one of them would shatter first. She stood in his Arizona mansion, wondering if love could survive the distance between his marble floors and her mother's medicine cabinet. The private jet had been her first clue that Carson's world operated by different rules. The helicopter ride from Phoenix to his Scottsdale estate had been her second. But standing in his foyer, surrounded by art that probably cost more than her mother's house, Tiffany felt the full weight of the gap between them. "Welcome home," Carson said, but she caught the uncertainty in his voice. He was watching her reaction, gauging whether she'd run or stay. His house perched on a mountainside like something from a magazine, all glass and angles and views that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. The infinity pool seemed to spill directly into the desert sunset, and she counted at least 3 separate living areas just from where she stood. She searched for words that wouldn't sound fake. "Incredible. It's too much," he said quietly. "I bought it to prove something to myself. Or maybe to Sarah. I'm not sure anymore." The honesty in his admission eased something tight in her chest. This wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing his life, even the parts that felt hollow. "Show me your favorite spot," she said. He led her to a small balcony off his bedroom, furnished with simple chairs and a view of the valley below. "I come here when I need to think. It's the only place that doesn't feel like a showroom." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Out here, with the desert breeze and his hand in hers, the house didn't matter. The money didn't matter. Only this did. "My friends are having a party tomorrow night," Carson said eventually. "I'd like you to meet them." The party was everything she'd expected. Beautiful people in expensive clothes, making conversation that skirted around anything real. The women smiled with sharp edges, sizing up the newcomer in her department store dress. The men assessed her like a business proposition. "So you're the marketing consultant," said James Morrison, Carson's business partner. His wife Rachel stood beside him, designer dress showcasing her perfect figure. "How refreshing. Carson usually dates models." "Marketing is challenging work," Rachel added, voice sweet as poison. "All those late nights demanding clients. Must be exhausting." Tiffany felt Carson's hand tighten on her waist, protective and possessive. "Tiffany built her own consulting firm from nothing," he said, pride clear in his voice. "She's brilliant." Later, they escaped to the pool area, string lights reflecting on the water like fallen stars. The party noise faded to a distant hum as Carson pulled her against him, mouth finding hers with desperate hunger. "Ignore them," he murmured against her lips. "You're worth 10 of every person in there." But as his hands roamed her body, claiming her in the shadow of his wealth, she wondered if being worth something was the same as belonging somewhere. Had you ever felt like you didn't belong in someone's world? How did you handle it? When his ex-fiancée showed up unannounced with tears in her eyes and news that would change everything, Tiffany realized she wasn't the only woman fighting for Carson's future. The woman at his door wasn't just his past. She was carrying his future, and everything Tiffany thought she knew about impossible was about to be proven wrong. Sarah Mitchell stood in Carson's doorway like a ghost made flesh, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the porch light, designer purse clutched in manicured hands. But it was her tear-stained face and the slight swell of her belly that made Tiffany's world tilt sideways. "Carson," Sarah's voice broke on his name. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Tiffany felt Carson's entire body go rigid beside her. The pool party continued behind them, laughter and music floating across the desert air, but the three of them stood frozen in a bubble of devastating silence. "Sarah," his voice was carefully controlled, but Tiffany could feel the earthquake happening beneath his surface calm. "What are you doing here?" "I'm pregnant." The words fell like bombs between them. 3 months. "I know what the doctor said. I know what we believe, but that's impossible." Carson's words came out strangled. "The tests, the specialists, they all said." "Miracles happen," Sarah interrupted, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. "Or maybe the doctors were wrong. I don't know. I just know I'm carrying your baby." The infinity pool reflected the desert sunset like liquid fire, but the beauty meant nothing as 3 lives balanced on the edge of revelation. Tiffany watched Carson's face cycle through disbelief, hope, fear, and something that looked dangerously like longing. "How do you know it's mine?" The question was barely a whisper. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Because you're the only man I've been with in 2 years. Because even after everything, even after I left, part of me never stopped hoping. Tiffany felt like she was drowning in air. The baby Carson thought he could never have. The family he'd mourned before he'd even lost it. The dream that had broken him was standing on his doorstep, very much alive. I need a paternity test, Carson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Of course, whatever you need. Sarah's eyes flicked to Tiffany, assessing, calculating. I didn't realize you had company. Tiffany. Carson's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Sarah, this is Tiffany. Tiffany, this is his ex-fiancée. Tiffany finished, proud that her voice stayed steady. The one who left because he couldn't give her children. Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. I was young, scared. I made a mistake. And now I'm asking for a second chance. For our baby's sake. Carson pulled Tiffany aside, his face a mask of confusion and pain. I need to know if it's mine. You understand that, right? She did. God help her, she did. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. What happens if it is? She asked quietly. I don't know. His honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. I wanted to be a father my entire life. If this is real, if it's possible. Would you stay with someone whose past just became their present? What would you do? As the paternity test results lay unopened on his desk, Tiffany made a choice that shocked everyone, including herself. I don't need to know if it's yours. I need to know if you're mine. The envelope sat on Carson's marble kitchen counter like a loaded gun. 3 days had passed since the paternity test, and neither of them had touched it. Tiffany watched Carson pace the length of his living room, his usual confidence replaced with something she'd never seen before, pure terror. Just open it, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Whatever it says, we'll handle it. Carson stopped pacing and looked at her like she'd grown wings. Handle it? Tiff, if that baby is mine, everything changes. My whole life, our whole life. Your life changed the night you told me you couldn't have kids, Tiffany interrupted, standing up from the couch. My life changed when I decided to love you anyway. A piece of paper doesn't get to decide our future. He stared at her, those green eyes searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. You're really okay with this? With her being part of our lives if? I'm not okay with any of it, Tiffany said, her honesty cutting through the room like a blade. I hate that she showed up. I hate that she lied to you for years. I hate that our love story has to include someone else's drama. Carson's face fell, but she wasn't finished. But I love you more than I hate this situation. And if that baby is yours, then we'll figure it out. Together. The kiss that followed was desperate, hungry, full of gratitude and fear and love, so fierce it could move mountains. His hands tangled in her hair as he pressed her against the wall, his body telling her everything his words couldn't. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her lips. Good thing love isn't about deserving, she whispered back, her fingers working the buttons of his shirt. It's about choosing. They made love right there on his living room floor, the unopened envelope watching from the counter like a silent witness. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a declaration that they would survive whatever truth waited inside that paper. Later, as they lay tangled in the throw blanket from his couch, Carson reached for the envelope with shaking hands. Together, Tiffany said, covering his hand with hers. They opened it together, read the results together, and when the words 99.7% probability of paternity stared back at them, they faced that truth together too. Carson was going to be a father. So, Tiffany said after a long moment of silence, I guess we're having a baby. Carson looked at her with wonder and confusion. That child is going to need a village, Tiffany said, sitting up and pulling the blanket around her shoulders. And like it or not, we're part of that village now. Have you ever had to love someone through their past catching up with them? How did you handle becoming part of a story you never chose to be in? But just as Carson pulled her close, ready to promise her the world, Tiffany's phone rang with news that would test their newfound strength in ways they never imagined. The man who thought he could never father children was about to become a father twice over. if the woman he loved could forgive him for believing lies. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Tiffany gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. Carson watched her face change from confusion to shock to something that looked like pure joy mixed with terror. "Yes, I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, hanging up and staring at Carson like she'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong? Is it your mom?" Tiffany shook her head slowly, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's impossible." She held up the phone, showing him the medical app notification that had just changed their lives forever. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like Christmas morning and a car crash all rolled into one moment. Carson's face went through every emotion humans were capable of feeling in the span of 10 seconds. I can't, the doctors said. "The doctors were wrong," Tiffany said, her own disbelief making her voice sound foreign. Or maybe Sarah was lying about more than just the timing. Or maybe she looked at him with wonder in her eyes. Maybe love really can work miracles. Carson stood up so fast he knocked over the coffee table, and for a moment Tiffany thought he might run. Instead, he fell to his knees in front of her, his hands hovering over her still flat stomach like he was afraid to touch something so precious. "You're carrying my baby," he whispered, and the reverence in his voice made her heart break in the most beautiful way. "We're carrying your baby," she corrected, covering his hands with hers and pressing them against her stomach. "Both of us. All three of us, if you count the little one Sarah's having." The kiss that followed was different from every other kiss they'd shared. This one tasted like future, like hope, like the kind of love that rewrites medical textbooks and makes doctors scratch their heads in wonder. "Marry me," Carson said against her lips, and Tiffany pulled back with a laugh. "You already asked me that. That was before I knew we were creating actual miracles together," he said, his eyes bright with tears he wasn't trying to hide. "Marry me because you're the mother of my impossible child. Marry me because you loved me when I thought I was broken. Marry me because—" "Yes," Tiffany said, shutting him up with another kiss. "Yes to all of it. Yes to the impossible baby and the complicated ex and the life we never planned for but somehow can't live without." They made love that afternoon with a gentleness that bordered on worship, Carson's hands and lips mapping every inch of her body like it was sacred ground. Which, considering what was growing inside her, maybe it was 2 babies, he murmured against her neck as they lay wrapped around each other afterward. "I'm going to be a father to 2 babies. Do you believe some people are meant to rewrite the rules? Have you ever experienced something that science said was impossible?" But as they celebrated their miracle, neither of them noticed the car pulling into Carson's driveway or the woman getting out with determination in her eyes and a lawyer by her side. She was planning the wedding of her dreams while fighting nightmares about becoming someone else's consolation prize. The wedding planner spread fabric samples across Tiffany's mother's kitchen table like she was dealing cards for the highest stakes game in town. Tiffany tried to focus on the difference between ivory and champagne silk, but her mind kept wandering to the custody papers Sarah had served Carson with that morning. "Honey, you're not even looking," her mother said, nudging Tiffany's shoulder. "This is supposed to be the fun part." "Fun," Tiffany repeated, like she'd never heard the word before. Right. The truth was, nothing felt fun anymore. Not since Sarah had hired a lawyer and started demanding joint custody before the baby was even born. Not since Carson had started spending more time in meetings with his legal team than planning their future together. "Maybe we should postpone," Tiffany said suddenly, and the wedding planner's face felt like she'd just canceled Christmas. "Postpone?" Her mother's voice went sharp with concern. "Baby, what's really going on?" Tiffany looked around the kitchen where she'd eaten cereal before school every morning for 12 years, where her mother had held her while she cried over broken hearts and broken dreams. This room had seen her at her lowest and celebrated her at her highest, and right now she needed its honesty more than anything. "What if I'm just a rebound that lasted too long?" she said, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them behind a dam. "What if he only chose me because she left him, and now that she's back with his baby—" "Stop right there." Her mother's voice carried the authority that had straightened Tiffany's spine since childhood. That man flew here every weekend for 3 months just to bring me soup when I had the flu. He learned to braid your hair from YouTube videos because you mentioned missing how your grandmother used to do it. You think a man does that for a rebound? The wedding planner quietly excused herself, probably sensing this conversation needed family privacy. But what if? What if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow? Her mother interrupted. What if the sky falls down? What if you waste the best love you've ever found worrying about what-ifs instead of fighting for what's real? That night, Carson found Tiffany sitting on her childhood bed, surrounded by wedding magazines she wasn't reading. "Cold feet?" he asked, sitting beside her on the pink comforter she'd had since high school. "Frozen solid," she admitted, leaning into his warmth. "Good thing I know how to warm things up," he said, his hands already working their way under her shirt, his lips finding that spot on her neck that made her forget her own name. They made love in that narrow bed where she dreamed of her wedding night as a teenager, and for a few perfect minutes, everything felt simple again. Have you ever been so afraid of losing something that you almost threw it away first? Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. But when she woke up the next morning to find a letter on her nightstand in Carson's handwriting, her blood ran cold. She walked down the aisle carrying more than flowers. She carried the letter that could destroy their love or prove it was unbreakable. The letter was burning a hole in Tiffany's bouquet as she stood at the back of the church, watching 300 people wait for her to make the walk that would change her life forever. Her hands shook as she remembered the words Carson had written but never sent. "Sarah, I know you're reading this wondering if I still love you. The truth is, part of me always will. You were my first everything, and losing you broke something in me I thought could never be fixed. You ready, baby girl?" her mother asked, straightening Tiffany's veil with gentle hands. Tiffany looked down the aisle at Carson, who stood waiting in his black tuxedo like a man facing salvation or execution. He wasn't sure which. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw everything in his face: love, fear, hope, desperation, and something that looked like an apology. He wrote her a letter. Tiffany whispered to her mother, the words barely audible over the organ music. What kind of letter? The kind that says he still loves her. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, and Tiffany thought she might tell her to run, to save herself from a lifetime of wondering if she was second choice. Instead, her mother smiled and kissed her cheek. "Then you better go ask him about it before you marry him, don't you think?" The walk down that aisle felt like it took a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. Every step was a choice between trust and fear, between love and self-preservation. When she reached Carson, she could see the moment he noticed something was wrong. "We need to talk," she whispered, and the color drained from his face. "Now, right now." She pulled the letter from her bouquet and handed it to him in front of God, their families, and everyone they'd ever cared about. The church went silent except for the sound of paper unfolding and hearts breaking. Carson read his own words with the horror of a man watching his life explode in slow motion. When he looked up at Tiffany, his eyes were wet with tears she'd never seen before. "I wrote this 3 months ago," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "The night after Sarah showed up, I was scared, confused, and hurting, and I thought maybe I owed her closure." "Did you send it?" "No." He crumpled the letter and dropped it at their feet. "Because the next morning I woke up next to the only woman I've ever truly loved, and I realized that loving someone your past doesn't mean they're your future." The kiss that followed was desperate, public, and full of promises that everyone in that church felt in their souls. "I choose you," he said against her lips. "I choose you today, tomorrow, and every day after that, even with all the complications, especially with all the complications." Have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Sometimes love means picking the harder path together. But as they turned to face the minister, Tiffany felt a sharp pain in her abdomen that made her gasp and grab Carson's arm. The baby who was never supposed to exist arrived on their wedding day, proving that some love stories are written by hands bigger than our own. "The baby's coming," Tiffany whispered, and Carson's face went from wedding joy to pure panic in the space of a heartbeat. "Now? But you're only 6 months." Tell that to your daughter, Tiffany said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. She apparently doesn't care about timing any more than her father does. The church erupted in organized chaos. Carson swept Tiffany into his arms like she weighed nothing, carrying her down the aisle they'd just walked as husband and wife. Their wedding guests became a parade of cars racing to the hospital, led by Tiffany's mother in her church dress and Carson's business partner calling ahead to the maternity ward. "This isn't how I planned our wedding night," Carson said as they wheeled Tiffany into the delivery room, his tuxedo jacket long abandoned and his shirt sleeves rolled up. "Nothing about us has gone according to plan," Tiffany panted between contractions. "Why start now?" 6 hours later, Carson held his daughter for the first time. She was tiny, perfect, and absolutely furious about being evicted from her warm home 3 months early. Her little fist wrapped around his finger like she was claiming him, and Carson felt something in his chest crack open in the most beautiful way. "She's got your attitude," he told Tiffany, who was exhausted but radiant in her hospital gown and smudged makeup. "And your timing," Tiffany replied with a tired laugh. Dramatic entrance and all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of NICU visits, sleepless nights, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes with loving something more than your own life. Sarah had her son 2 weeks later, a healthy, full-term baby who looked exactly like Carson but had his mother's quiet temperament. "You know what the funny part is?" Tiffany said one evening as they sat in the NICU, watching their daughter sleep in her tiny incubator while Carson held his son. "I spent so much time worrying about being second choice. I forgot that sometimes the best families aren't the ones you plan for." "Were we exactly?" Carson asked, looking around at their complicated, beautiful, impossible situation. "We're us," Tiffany said simply. 2 kids who needed parents they could count on, and 2 adults who figured out that love multiplies instead of divides. Even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. Carson leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promises for their chaotic, wonderful future. "I love you, Mrs. Blake. I love you too, Daddy Blake." Do you believe the best love stories are the ones that rewrite all the rules? Sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as complications. If this story reminded you that love can overcome impossible odds, smash that like button and subscribe for more true-to-life stories that prove broken doesn't mean unfixable. Tell me in the comments, what impossible thing has love made possible in your life? And remember, the most beautiful families aren't always the ones we plan for, but the ones we choose to build together, one miracle at a time.